Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Press Coverage, part of the Going for Two Live Network. I'm Kyle Senra, as always, and I haven't changed my name yet. Senra says, still the Twitter account, and my guest for this episode is Brian Ford at FFJunkie_. Brian,
right.
co-host of the Dynasty Saturday Night 5 here on the Going for Two Live Network. I've appreciated when you've invited me on. We've had interactions. You've come on the Dynasty Gambit as well. So, Brian, welcome to Press Coverage.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I feel honored. You know, you've had some pretty interesting names on here. You know, even guys that I know a little bit, like Matt Hicks and Kevin Coleman, and it's like I have no idea why you asked me because I don't belong with them. But here we are.
All grouped together. Yeah, this is it's been a fun season here on Press Coverage, the third season of this, and as always, I love the last episode of the season, which this is the season 3 finale. I always like to have a Going for Two member come on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, naturally, year one, Jeff Lambert, our founder, that seemed like the logical choice just to explain the whole founding of Going for Two. So that seemed to make sense there. And then the doc approached me, Dr. James Freddy, either end of year one or during that second year, and I thought, okay, yeah, he's a great guest I'd like to have on for the season finale, and it ties into the season. Which we're getting to. We're almost at the NFL season. And then, with a season full of teachers, a teacher at Going for Two, not just teaching people about Dynasty, but as an educator in your profession, you were just a natural fit for the season 3 finale.
Thanks. Yeah.
But yes, I guess before we get started, we have to, I'll use some of your favorite keywords, but we have to pay our sponsors, the underdog overlords, I think, or underlords, I'm not sure. But yes, you can join Underdog using either our promo code GF2 or for those watching the video, we have a QR code. And yeah, if you have not yet signed up for Underdog, but do so using either of those two methods, Underdog will double your initial deposit up to $100. So if you're new to Underdog, join in, sign in using the promo code GF2. If you put $100, they will give you an extra $100 in your account, and you'll have $200 to participate in best ball drafts. Underdog best ball drafts it's crazy how super popular they've become. I'm not just going to say it's because this podcast and everything on Going for Two is sponsored by Underdog. We constantly talk about it. It's totally not just us. We're a big part of it though. No, I'm sure. But yeah, a lot of people love Underdog. So join all the fun. Sign up, GF2, scan that QR code, and yeah, sign up for Underdog. Start best ball drafting. There'll be eventually like NFL games. You can pick higher lowers on game totals. You can or player stats as well. That's all going to be coming in NFL games real soon. Season's here. Looking forward to it. And I guess Jamie's saying, look at these two smart brains on the screen at the same time. It says brains, right? Not Brian's, because my name isn't Brian.
Yeah.
And yeah, Jamie, good to have you always in the comments. Super appreciative of Jamie's support.
What's up, Jamie? Good to see you.
So yeah, I guess we can start off this episode as the way we always start off every episode. Brian, what are your first sports memories?
Yeah, so I'm in North Jersey. Grew up in Union County, and now live in a town named Montclair, right outside, not right outside, but a couple towns away from Newark. And I was just one of those people who I just rooted for whoever my dad rooted for, right? Because he's sitting there watching the game, and I just was rooting along with him. So I grew up Mets, Jets, Knicks, Rangers, and especially Mets and Jets and Rangers. So we would go to Shea Stadium and watch the Mets. We'd go at least a couple times a year. My grandfather would come. There'd always be at least one game where my grandfather would come, and it was one of those things where you not even really sneak, right? Because it was like the 80s when I was a kid, but people didn't care much. You just bring your own sandwiches, so you didn't have to pay out the nose, right? For the concessions, and didn't really do the Jets much. The season tickets there are super expensive, and there's a 90-year wait list. But Ranger games, went to a lot of Rangers games in Madison Square Garden. I even had a gym teacher, right, who had season tickets and would give them to us sometimes as well. And I just remember rooting along with my dad, for those teams. I remember there was a year in the mid 80s, I want to say, with the Jets. They went like 10-5-1 that year, and they like clinched the playoffs in like the last game of the year. And I remember him. My dad doesn't show a lot of emotion, and he jumped up and hit his head on our like low 7-foot ceiling in our living room, when because they clinched it like the last week of the season. So I think my first sports memories are that, Mets, Jets, Rangers, going to games with my dad and my grandfather and my brother, and that sort of thing. And then as far as like playing, I think like a lot of suburban kids back then, I did a lot of soccer when I was a kid. Did some little league and that sort of thing. As I got older with baseball, it became very, very apparent that like I was a decent pitcher and a decent fielder, but hitting was really not my thing. Like I'd be in the little league and I'd hit like 300, but like the leaderboard's up there, and like the kid who's on top is hitting like 625. So yeah, and as I got older, it just the competition gets tougher, and it just it just wasn't really my thing. I'm just not really great at it. I think there's reasons for that we may get into later, but one thing that I did really latch on to when I was in high school, a sport that I really was good at. I played lacrosse for 2 years in high school. And then I transferred schools, and at the time, the school I transferred to didn't have a program. So that was pretty much the end of my organized sports. I played a little bit of football, organized football in 7th and 8th grade. That was fun. So I dabbled, but yeah, those are probably my sort of youth sports memories. Yeah.
Just to mention, so apparently Jamie loves the Rangers as well. So even he have a connection there. He's naming, Brian Leach, Mark Messier, Mike Richter were his favorite all-time players.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Besides Gretzky, of course. But Gretzky wasn't there for that cup win, so I suppose 1994 he would have witnessed, Leach, Messier, Richter.
Bro, 94 was such a weird year, right? Because the Rangers won the cup, and the Knicks were in the finals, and all that was going on at the same time as the OJ thing.
Yeah.
Like I remember watching. I think it was the Knicks game that or was it the Rangers game that night?
I think it was the Knicks game, and the Rangers were having the playoff parade that day.
Yeah, and the split screen was like the Bronco chase, right? And it was like, what the hell? It's just so weird to look back on and think about that. Yeah.
Not to plug the 4-letter network, but the 30 for 30, my favorite one that they've done is the one of that day, the OJ Simpson car chase, because they talked about every other sporting event that was happening. So it wasn't just the 2 New York things. It might have been centered around New York too. The United States were hosting the World Cup for the first time, the Men's World Cup. And
right,
there was, I think the United States were playing that night, or there was a big game. I don't know if it was like in the knockout stage, but it seems like there was an important game happening at the same time. Probably there was Yankees were probably playing or Mets. How big those both are, but yeah, there was just several really huge, impactful sporting events, and the only thing anyone cared about was this car chase. So yeah, that's definitely.
So we're gonna talk about one of my favorite bands later. They were playing that night in Milwaukee, and you gotta remember this is 1994, right? So there's no like cell phones, Twitter, right? Like, so they were like making references to OJ in the second set. And like in the middle of a jam, they were like, "Run, OJ, run," and like so people had no idea what was going on until they like left and got home and figured it out. Those were the pre-social media days. Yeah.
Band still had the information somehow. Smart band, clearly, well informed. But yes, just to keep informed. Oh yeah, Jamie wants to keep us fully informed. Doesn't want to forget Gartner either. The one name I'm surprised was Adam Graves, who I know is also a really key player to that cup run. But yeah, 94, the glory days of the Rangers, ending at what at the time was the longest cup drought in NHL history. Do you think the Leafs have broken it now? I can't remember. If they haven't yet.
Opposing fans used to chant 1940 at us.
Oh wow, yeah. How infamous. Well, yeah, that's done now. The Glenn Anderson was on that team too. What a great team.
A lot of veterans, a lot of expensive like veteran free agents. Kind of, I don't want to say they like bought the team, but like they had a good team in place, and then they brought in a lot of really good role players that were, more expensive than the younger role players to make sure it was all
And I mean, key players they did draft, like Adam Graves, Brian Leach draft. I'm pretty sure he played his whole career with the Rangers. Same with Mike Richter. So like, it's funny because you think of that core: Messier, Anderson, and then Glenn Souther at coach. They won 6 Cup-togethers, 5 with the Oilers, and then let's bring the whole band over to New York. And eventually Gretzky showed up. He was a little late to the party though. He was singing the blues in St. Louis.
I remember where I was when the Gretzky to LA trade got announced.
Man,
I was down the shore. I was on vacation with my family. My great aunt had a house in down the shore, and Gretzky got traded that night or something like that, or we found out the next morning. Remember
again, pre-social media, I would have found out instantly.
Yeah.
but then that trade is just crazy because like that proved anyone could get traded. Certainly in hockey, like, do you imagine Tom Brady getting traded and not just leaving as a free agent? That's wild. So hockey's a wild sport. Watch it, folks. It's fun. In a couple of months, I know you'll have your football soon. But yes, well, that's one question. Just very loquacious as I thought we'd be. So perfect. But yes, obviously sports, we have a lot of fun, whether it's watching or playing them. I know, Brian, you and I love playing fantasy football. So when did fantasy sports start for you?
That's a really good question. I was thinking about this, and it's kind of fuzzy, and I started playing in like the late 90s. And, full disclosure, like the late 90s is kind of a blur for me. There were a lot of alcohol and drugs at the time. And some of the stuff didn't stick, like the record button wasn't working. And so I remember vaguely, getting into fantasy football with a couple of friends of mine. There was this website called Sandbox. It was like, it might have even been like when Yahoo had it, like 97, something like that, So like just as the internet was viable enough to do fantasy sports. So I never had one of those pen and paper, check the box score in the newspaper leagues. I kind of got in like right after that, like right at the beginning of the internet version of things. But I've been playing for like 20 something years, and I got really, really into it. I did hockey, I did football, I did basketball. I did an XFL fantasy league one year, when it first came out, like when the He Hate Me guy, right? Remember that? Do you remember that at all? The He Hate Me? Yeah. So like,
you're talking like XFL like 1.0.
Oh yeah, like Vince McMahon XFL.
No, that's At that point, I think I mostly just paid attention to hockey, like the other sport. Well, golf at my house. It was always hockey or golf that was on, but like I didn't really pay too much attention to football at that point, to be honest.
Yeah, so they allowed some players or whatever to wear nicknames or something on there, and there was this guy that wore on the back of his jersey, "He Hate Me." I don't know, but anyway, so like, and then it just kind of like just became a staple, just kind of always every year doing at least a couple sports. Yahoo was the main one there, for a long time for me. And at first didn't do much, for money. It was just kind of fun, and oddly enough, as much as I like love Dynasty, obviously, it was a really long time before I got into anything Dynasty. Like I started playing in the late 90s. I think the first time I played Dynasty might have been like 2019, something like that. So yeah, it was a long time before I even thought about like that as like a thing I'd like to get into. And then like, just, I got bit by the bug and I'm an addict.
So I think I think what Jamie's saying here is He Hate Me's name was Rod Smart.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Smart man to go with the He Hate Me because everyone remembers that now. Branding, right? But yes, and yes, Jamie, we do play.
I mean, he's probably packing groceries now or something, but
funny because it's either groceries or selling insurance. Those are the only two jobs former NFL players could have. Apparently, there's nothing else available to them.
So Memphis Young, the founder of the one of the leaders of the Dynasty Warzone brand,
Right. Yeah.
has this phrase he uses for like the bad competition that they're playing against in preseason, or I think he calls it like
Walmart greeters?
No, crumb bums and shoe clerks or something. I don't know. And it's like, okay, all right, yeah.
So apparently, Rod Smart played 53 games for the Panthers and Raiders. Jamie's quite smart to share us this information. He also talked a lot about hockey, and I just find it funny to go back to the.
Do you
Brian
remember
Leach
pop-up video on VH1?
Yes. Yeah, you'd have the music video, and then you have little bubbles pop up to kind of explain like behind the scenes or history of the band. Yeah.
Jamie's doing our pop-up video right now.
Yes, you know what? Yes, good job, Jamie. You're the editor in chief when you decide to pop in here. But it's funny because I also started playing fantasy in the mid '90s. But as I mentioned, like I was a big hockey fan, and my parents loved watching golf, so I kind of became a big golf fan. But yeah, it was fantasy hockey for a while. It was all I did, and it was actually just the playoffs. I remember one year I think joining Yahoo. Funny enough, we're plugging that site. I think it was when I first went to university, so 2010. I joined a full season fantasy hockey league. It's kind of boring by the end of the year, but fantasy football, shorter span, and the lineups once a week, that's much more interesting. So I think I joined a fantasy football league probably the next year.
I remember when like you had to pay extra if you wanted live scoring for your league. Like on Yahoo, like fantasy football was free. Oh. But like if you wanted live scoring, you could pay like a little extra,
You'd have to wait till the next day. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, like I'm watching Red Zone, and if I don't turn my sleeper notifications off, they're telling me who scored a touchdown 5 seconds before it happens on the TV. It's like it's wild. It's wild.
Yeah, how far we've come. Imagine now if Yahoo tried to pay for live scoring, no one would use the site, right? So
you're talking about, yeah.
So they got ahead of it. At least they made some good money then. But all to say, it's funny how I think if you think hockey, and we'll dwell on this for a sec. This show is so freeform we can. Yeah. But it just kind of gave me an idea of maybe two of the greatest American players ever are mentioned in this. Brian Leach and Mike Richter. And now I played defense when I played hockey. My dad did as well. Like we both are convinced Bobby Orr is the greatest player ever, not Gretzky. So biased towards defensemen. Brian Leach is usually the answer I give when people ask who's the greatest American player. Usually I'll go to like the centers, the high producing forwards, but on that Rangers team, it's Brian Leach who got the playoff MVP. As I think he had like 30 something points, like one of the two highest point totals for a defenseman in a playoff series or a playoff year ever. So I certainly think Brian Leach deserves consideration in that conversation, where I find whenever people bring that up, best American players ever, it seems like he's rarely ever mentioned yet.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have an answer towards that, if you've ever pondered that.
No, because I don't know well enough who's American, who's Canadian, and all that. So I wouldn't really have a good memory one way or another to say that. Yeah.
90s memory, right? We didn't touch that. I think the answer
was Jeremy Roenick American?
Yes, he is.
I mean, I'm not saying it's him. I'm just wondering. Like, I thought he was. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think Mike Modano is the all-time leading American-born player in points. So that's, I think, and deservingly so, one of the players that's often mentioned. I know Patrick Kane is a recent player also gets mentioned.
Oh yeah.
Conversation, a 3-time Cup winner. Also has a Conn Smythe trophy to his name.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't really follow sports besides football anymore. and I don't really root for a football team anymore. It's kind of interesting. It's one of the many ways in which I'm kind of like different from a lot of people in the fantasy space. Like I'll go into leagues and we'll just be talking and they'll ask me what my team is. I'm like, I don't got a team. And like I don't watch playoff football. I barely watch it.
Okay.
It's not relevant for fantasy, so I kind of don't care. Yeah, like I can't remember the last time I've like sat down and like, yeah, I'm gonna watch the Super Bowl. This is so exciting.
You sound like me. I say that every year.
I don't really care. I just has no bearing on fantasy. I care so little about it.
Football ends after the first week in January. And even actually the first week of January is usually week 18, so it ends the week before then.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll end the fantasy sports discussion for now and get into the theme of season 3 of press coverage and teaching. So first question in that regard, Brian, is when did you first get the inclination that you wanted to teach?
So I teach high school history, and people ask me, you know, what made you want to become a teacher? What did you know you? And I don't have a really great answer for it. You'll hear a lot of teachers have very like poignant stories about it. And for me, it was like I, I I transferred like 3 times in college, and it was finally time to you know get serious about finishing. And I spent my last 2 years at Rutgers in New Brunswick here in New Jersey, and I majored in history there just because I loved history. Um, it was my favorite thing. And it's one of those things where we tell people the story, get good grades, go to college, get a job. Like that's the linear progression you're supposed to do. And so I'm sitting there and thinking about like, well, what can I do with a history degree? And I landed on teaching. I think one of the reasons I landed on it was I was really good at explaining things to people, and I was really good at helping people figure things out, and I was really good at telling stories, you know, making it come alive, right? And then I thought about like being the kind of adult in a teenager's life that I kind of wish I had when I was a teenager. So I dropped out of high school. I got my GED before I went to college. And I was lost, as a teenager, 16, 17 years old, just a lot of drugs, and yeah, and the adults were few and far between who were understanding, or who didn't look down on you, you know, and I didn't have anybody to talk to, you know, um, teachers, like one of them I liked, didn't get along with a lot of my family, and I hated what school was for a lot of students, just a boring prison. And so yeah, so one of the reasons I became a teacher was like I want to not do it that way.
It's funny because you talk about how other people seem to have profound answers, and usually it's because of a really positive interaction with a specific teacher. Oh, I want to be like them, but you're almost the opposite. If you had that absence and found there's a void to fill because I haven't seen that, that's what I want to be like.
Yeah, and I'm kind of at a new. I mean, I could go on forever, but I'm kind of at a new phase of that because I've learned in the last 2 years that I have ADHD and I'm autistic. There's about somewhere between 30 and 80% of autistic folks also have the combo platter with ADHD. And in this journey of like finding out more about my brain and how it interacts with the world, I'm reflecting on like how I could have done better for those brains in my classroom as a teacher, and so I want to do so. Now my mission, if you will, is like my classroom is going to be neurodiversity affirming. Yeah.
You'll be able to reach every kid, maybe not
I mean,
specifically on a day-to-day basis, but through the course of the year, everyone will feel
yeah. I mean,
accepted
like
and they can approach you and they can
like
learn.
you want to get up and stretch and walk around. Get up and stretch and walk around. You want to doodling helps a lot of ADHD people focus. I want to have like a box of like fidget toys for people, like, is the lighting too bright? Okay, let's dim it, like, it doesn't have to be, this sterile, boring experience that forces people to be in a box that's uncomfortable for them, and that's kind of where I'm at with that these days.
I've noticed like more and more here in Canada the popularity of the standing desk. So the students who don't want to be sitting down can follow the lessons while standing. Or
Yeah.
one thing I think that's really cool, it's pedals, not attached to a bike or anything, but the student can just pedal while they're sitting at their desk. And again, for certain kids, especially with ADHD, that sometimes can be really helpful.
So I don't know if you can see that Amazon box there.
Oh yeah,
by the bookcase.
Mhm.
I mean, F Amazon, but it's an under desk bike
Okay.
pedal thing. So it's
Yeah.
good because I want to increase physical movement in my life, but it's also very good for fidgeting energy and things like that. So, and then obviously I got to put it together, but because I have ADHD, it's going to sit there for 7 months. But,
If only you had pedals that you already done, and then you could do that while you're building it, it might help. But
yeah, something like
it's
that.
like buying the scissors pack, and you can't open the package without the scissors.
Oh, I saw a thing on like that you can do it without it. It was like one of these videos, like a reel or whatever the hell they call it on Facebook, that was like a million facts you wish you knew. Like airplane neck pillows are supposed to go like with this part in the front, and all this stuff. And one of them was how to open those packages without the scissor.
Teaching a lot of great stuff here. Now, can't always teach the way Jamie teaches. I've always wanted adults to buy me beer and cigarettes. Have you ever done that for teenagers? I don't know what the laws are like in New Jersey, but I'm pretty sure. I know if I do that in Canada, I might not get fired, but I'll definitely be suspended for a long time. So.
I mean, I was a teenager hanging outside of liquor stores asking people to do that. But
yeah, even on the other side, but not the flip side of the coin. So no, the answer is no, Jamie. Sorry for the fun. We're not the type of adults you wanted. Sorry. But I guess next question: have you ever used, because again we're back to fantasy sports again, but because it's so impactful and so important to your life, have you ever used fantasy sports as part of a lesson? I know maybe history might not be the most obvious way, but
yeah, I mean the short answer to that is no. So, the history way, it's just there's not a very natural fit there. I know, some math people have done it, or like whatever probability. I know I wish I looked up the name. There's a group on Twitter, and what they do is they help, they teach special needs students through fantasy football. Oh, gosh, I wish I knew what it was. There's a group of teachers who do it, and they're on Twitter. So like I know that like people do it. It's just never been like a thing that really fit well in the classroom for me. But like I kind of bonded with students over it. They're surprised to find out I play, and so we talk about it a little bit, here and there. Who's on your team? How'd your team do this weekend? And that sort of thing. And actually, the longest running league I've ever was in was I just left it a little while ago. 15 years in a keeper league, a fantasy baseball league, and that was started by 2 former students. So after they graduated, they invited me, and so that like maintained our relationship for years. Yeah. So
at this point, my longest running fantasy league is 11 years. So that's definitely a commitment to that.
Yeah, I don't have anything near that long anymore. People talk about home leagues. I'm like, home league, friends.
You're not homeless, but
I don't have like, because a lot of the people I roll with, like outside of the fantasy space, aren't really fantasy people. In fact, like there are times like in some of those circles where I'll mention, what I do, like podcasts and fantasy football, and they're like really surprised, that I do, because I just don't. There's an image I think they have of who plays fantasy football, and I'm not it.
Oh, so the nerdy glasses wearing guy isn't the image of fantasy football. Strange. I guess that's from the Matrix. Visual self image. That's what I get out of it. Everyone who plays fantasy looks like me now.
Yeah, but like, listen, the fantasy space is not a very friendly space sometimes. It's not a very progressive space sometimes. I think a lot of the people who are creators and who have like influence and stuff like that on social media are to an extent, but you go in your average, sleeper league with these 25-year-olds who play Call of Duty and think they know everything. Like, there's a lot of chodes. There's a lot of bros. There's a lot
I was gonna say bro culture does kind of coincide with fantasy football.
There's a lot of homophobia and misogyny, and if you express anything that is trying to maybe destigmatize something or push language in a certain direction, or just ask people not to be a dick and be an adult, you get called, softest Charmin. And so, when I'm in like a meeting for like, a socialist organization, and we're chopping it up about whatever. And, I'm not like a bro, like I don't have my fitted backwards, like, and I tell them that I play fantasy football. They're kind of surprised. Yeah.
I suppose, the football sports machine is a very capitalist idea, right? So it would.
Well, football's one of the most socialist sports, actually, in the way that it like shares revenue and things like that. But I describe it as a leftover of a younger me that cared about sports, and just the fantasy part of it is what's left over. But I just really love it. It's just a really cool hobby that like I am way too into. I mean, my tag, right? My Twitter handle has junkie in it, right? There's a reason for that. Yeah.
Anyway, Jamie's saying it's a lot of "you're an idiot" for our takes, but they can never elaborate, so that makes them the idiots. Take that. No, you are. What am I? No.
Oh yeah, I mean, you get in some of the replies on some of these things on Twitter, and it's like just trash human beings saying trash things, who just like to condescend on a take and mock you, and then like don't want to engage in a discussion about it. Just
I'll be honest, like some of the like Dynasty group chats I'm in, they're big enough that you get some of that as well. Certain people who you see that name come up and it's like, oh, this is probably going to be either you're all an idiot, what are you all doing, or very condescending.
What I've started doing with some stuff is muting the conversation, just because I just
don't want
to deal
on
with
Twitter.
it.
That's good. The mute button will still function. That's so important. You can block out the rest. But yeah. Well, I guess yeah. So the not so well. You know what? We've already kind of started answering this next question: the parallels between real life outside the fantasy football community and in teaching.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the negatives, right? There's even outside of the fantasy sphere, there's tons of negativity just in the real world social media platforms in general.
Yeah. What's interesting for me is, I teach in Northeast New Jersey, right? And this story would be different if I was 2 towns over in Nutley, if I was down the shore in some of those, Republican areas, if I was in Northwest or Southwest Jersey, which might as well be Pennsylvania and Alabama sometimes. But like where I'm at and where I teach and just the vibes, are just sometimes it's fake progressive, like pat ourselves on the back, and then when a push comes to shove, you're not willing to put any skin in the game. Like you'll put a Black Lives Matter sign on your lawn, but you don't want to defund the police. But pronouns and language that's respectful, and sort of an assumption, right, that the U.S. is a racist among other things, society, and the history's been written by the winners, and and I guess it can be kind of a bubble sometimes, right? Because you know, uh, 16-year-olds that I teach are much smarter, better critical thinkers, more progressive, more loving, humane human beings than a lot of the people in the fantasy space.
They're a
You know,
lot more accepting of, this isn't always how it has to be.
and
Even just being,
people want to joke about it and call it like woke or whatever, and that sort of thing. And listen, I could go on for 5 hours about these idiots, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough, right? Because um, uh, you know, I, I'll interact with these kids, and I teach history, so we're talking about how history informs us to change the present and the future. Um, and I have hope sometimes, uh, because some of these kids, they're really sharp, and they're really compassionate and empathetic, and they want to make change, and they know who the real enemies are, and that sort of thing. And then I got to deal with some jerk off 31-year-old on 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 Twitter, fantasy football space, who should know better, who's whatever pushing back against the fact that I have like pronouns in my display name on Twitter. Oh, pronouns. That's a sign of it. Whatever. Oh, and it's like, man,
just waiting for them to like use a pronoun in their message at some
right.
point, just to
And
yeah.
so it's not a parallel between teaching and the fantasy space. It's perpendicular, right? Like, again, the fantasy space is a much more regressive, reactionary, toxic space than the time I spend with 16-year-olds.
And I think part of it is, this generation of youth right now. They're just so well informed. They're coming out with all sorts of technology. The truth can't be hidden from them, and they're smart enough to make judgments of their own and not just be, blindly be, told what to think. I think the last few generations have been better at that, at just understanding that we need to be informed. But it seems like
Mhm.
this youth generation right now has no choice but to be informed.
Well, I,
In
I
certain
love
senses, right?
I love Gen Z. People want to make fun of Gen Z. I love them. They got the right idea. They look around and they said everybody else screwed up the world. Fuck it, let's just vape and go on TikTok. And I
I think you
mean
said
that,
that on
and
DSM-5 one
I
time.
I mean that in the most loving way, right? Like, I don't mean that they're disengaged from the world, because they're very engaged in the world and they're very into making change. But they look around and they see that they've inherited a literally boiling earth, right? They've inherited decrepit politicians, late stage capitalism, student debt, like baby boomers, and to an extent other folks did the equivalent of leaving that one square of toilet paper on the roll and making it somebody else's job. And good for them for saying, I'm not gonna go to college. I'm gonna figure out some other way. I'm gonna be an influencer. I'm gonna sell feet pics on OnlyFans. I'm gonna hustle and make my own brand of fashion. Good for them. Good for them. What does college get you? Right? I love college. I love to learn, but it's not for everybody, right? And to ask people to go into 5-6 figure debt for a college education, good for
It's
them for
it's
saying
a
F you.
serious investment, right? You got to
Yeah.
be
Yeah. Good for
willing and
them.
ready to know what that entitles. But yeah, let's go, kids. All our hopes are on you. Uh, which I'm sure our generation was told that by the previous generation, and was vice versa. That cycle has continued for a while, I imagine. All right, so I was gonna say maybe this is get more positive, but you actually you're clearly a host, because you've got the transition spot pretty good. You mentioned the one word influence, and I don't know if there's any
No,
TikTok
no.
influences.
You are the king of segues. No. You are the king. You
Well,
will.
I
you
didn't
will,
say I was giving you the crown, but I said you're good at it.
You will grab a word out of 5 sentences ago and drag a segue out of it into the next section. You are the king.
Well, I'm doing that now because I think it's been about 5, 6 sentences since you said the word influencer. But who have been the biggest influences in your life so far?
Yeah, that's a really tough question for me to answer. A lot of people, especially the teachers that folks, that you've had on, will talk about teachers in their lives. We'll talk about family members and things like that. And, they love their grandfather and shit like that. And it's not like that for me. Like, the people who have influenced me the most have not been, adults who were in my family. Were not really adults who were in, close social circles of mine. It was my friends. And it was folks who I learned about, many of whom came before me, so people I don't even know, historical figures, people like that, authors I've read, those are the folks who have influenced me the most. Yeah.
I would say at least in the positive way, because you've probably gotten like, in a sense, the negative influences
Oh,
in terms
yeah.
of what not to get. But yeah, we want to focus on the
Very
positive
true.
influences.
Yeah, no, yeah. My insurance helps me cover $250 a week to talk about the negative influence that adults have had on my life.
Yeah.
Get in, losers. We're healing our trauma. Like, yeah, I mean, but as far as like positive influence and shaped like the best version of me and the person I aspire to be and like the me I am when I'm proud of myself, it wasn't my family. I mean, it was Karl Marx, like has more of an influence on me than my dad. Right?
Well, to be fair,
And
Karl Marx has influenced a lot of people, to be fair. So.
Right. And that's not always true, like for people,
No, and you're right. Like we've heard a lot of guests where the first things they say are parents or teachers. So
Yeah,
it's I'm glad we're departing from.
I went to Catholic school, kindergarten through 10th grade, right? And so, listen, there's a lot of teachers that I came across who probably thought they were doing the right thing, but like, when I was in 6th grade, my friend was chewing on his pen, and the nun who was teaching the class asked him to come up to the front of the room. She said, "Put the pen in your mouth." And she goes, "You like chewing on pens, don't you?" And she like was shaking it while it was in his mouth, and it burst, and the ink went in his mouth. Right? When I was in 3rd grade, teacher tried to enforce gender norms, and the one boy who was always playing with the girls, and there was one girl who was always playing with the boys on the playground, and that of course couldn't be. She made the boy wear a bow in his hair, and she made the girl wear a tie, like the school uniform tie that we wear, right? And like that's the message I'm getting in 3rd grade about gender norms, So I can't say that I went through school and teachers have had a positive influence on me. One teacher, Mrs. Graham, as much as she was whatever, full on Catholic and all that bullshit, but she encouraged my love of history and geography and things like that.
So yeah, we'll name the positive influence. We'll leave the other ones. They don't deserve the name coming out. They don't deserve the press. But yeah, so okay, now we'll get to something fun for sure because we're talking hobbies, and of course fantasy football's on the list. But what are your favorite hobbies, Brian?
I struggled to think about the answer to this question too. I think some of the Gen Z who I love who are watching this are going to tell me to touch grass because I don't really have hobbies. I don't really get out much. Fantasy football is really my core hobby. And then, the free time that I have is often spent doing political work, and so, that's the other big chunk of my time is used that way. There is one hobby that I have that's neither of those, that I kind of have gone in and out of. Kind of life happens and I put it to the side. But the first time I ever podcasted, the reason I have this mic and this mixer and this headphones, right? I have a podcast called Brian Talks to Humans, and it's just me interviewing everyday people. So the conceit, the idea of the podcast is that everyday people's life stories are interesting, right? Not just because they're some famous whatever, right? My friend joked that I'm like a poor man's Mark Maron, right? I bring people in, we talk about their life, except he's a celebrity talking to celebrities and we aren't, right? And so I've kind of, I would do that, fall in love with it, and then life would happen and I have to put it down for a while, and then I'd do that, fall in love with it, life would happen, put it down for a while. And this February I did my first episode in a long time, and then just recorded one a few days ago. It's going to come out soon. And what I'm trying to do with this season, or this era of the show, is to really lean into neurodivergent folks, right? Because one of the, for a million reasons, but one of the reasons is that when it comes to neurodivergence, especially sort of the more visible ones on social media and YouTube, like being autistic and ADHD, we're in the middle of a really interesting historical moment that we're finding a lot more about it, that a lot more people of my generation, and a little older and a little younger, who slipped through the cracks, for years, are, discovering, getting diagnosed. And what's really interesting too is that a lot of the best knowledge and resources for folks like me are coming from folks like me, right? Like if you look at the DSM-5 language on diagnosing autism, it's deeply ableist. It's flawed language, right? Really looks at it as a disorder and a disease, and right, like a pathology, something that's bad, instead of a neurotype, just a different kind of brain, right? And so what hashtag actually autistic folks are doing is, getting out there on social media and YouTube, pushing back against that and creating spaces for us and culture for us and resources for us, right? Like I have a wonderful therapist. I have a new therapist I started seeing in November. I love her, right? But even she will say, like, there's a way that she doesn't understand me in a way that when I go into a Discord of autistic ADHD folks understand me, right? And we're doing that. We're out on social media, we're out on YouTube, we're producing the best information for us, not medicine and psychology communities. And it's kind of like, some people have compared it to like LGBTQIA plus movement, like say 60 years ago, right? When there was much more cultural space, right, for people to start talking about who they were and their experiences and what it's like to be them, and the world realizing there's a hell of a lot more of us than they thought, that sort of thing. There's certain parallels there. And interestingly enough, there's actually a disproportionate overlap, between autistic folks and the rainbow community, particularly the gender nonconforming community.
I guess if maybe your brain's wired a different way, you won't be wired to think of male, female, and just in there's other aspects where it's not wired to think in a non-divergent way.
Neurotypical is
Neurotypical, right? Yeah,
the word that's we use most often. Yeah.
I don't need too many double negatives in there. That gets confusing. But I mean, the firsthand experience of being someone who's autistic probably does give you the best sphere to be able to share that. Like I said, your therapist, seems like what you've said, she's a great therapist, but even she has the limits of what she knows. And I think the best therapists aren't necessarily trying to tell you something they know. It's how do they help you inside your own head figure out what's going on in there. Just, help map things out, help find a pathway to kind of fully understand it.
Yeah, and there's not a whole lot of therapists who have experience, right? Like I switched therapists in November. I was seeing the same therapist for like 25 years, and it started to kind of plateau, you know. And
That is a long time. I know my wife.
and
I'm sure she couldn't even imagine having a client for 25 years. She's a therapist, and
and this particular therapist has a lot of experience with neurodivergent adults, and it's very, so she knows a lot, you know, and she's had a lot of experience. So yeah, it's a really good fit. Yeah.
Apparently, Jamie loved playing with the girls when he was a kid, and they played a game called Doctor under the jungle gym. I'm now going to call him Dr. Jamie as much as I remember.
You know, he could probably, you know, replace Dr. Jim on the Monday night show now. You know,
I was just thinking that. Doc won't be. He'll still. He said he'll still come on for certain episodes, but it won't be. He won't be a regular. Maybe once a month type thing. So there might be. Yeah,
leave it to Jamie. Will always take any serious topic and like inject like a 6th grade joke about it. I love Jamie.
Yeah, no, he's great for that. Now we're starting to peel back like young Jamie. Like, okay, this is the origins of where all this behavior came from.
Yeah.
Dr. Jamie, sorry. I guess he wasn't a doctor then.
So yeah, as far as hobbies go, yeah, it's the podcast that I dabble in.
Which, by the way,
it's political work. Brian talks to humans. Yeah.
Brian talks to humans. Okay.
At the end. So the title came from essentially a joke that like I didn't get out much, you know, and so this is actually the only time that I talk to human beings.
Oh my God, he finally did it. He finally
it. And which is really interesting because, well, like what I've noticed is a lot of neurodivergent folks will refer to people as like humans, like when we're around other humans, ... to the point where like neurotypical people have noticed it, like, yo, dude, you call people humans like you're an alien or something. Oh well.
I mean, maybe we are aliens. Who knows? Anyway, so there's a lot we don't know. But is there something about you, Brian, that we don't know? And you have revealed a lot. So is there anything else you would like to share that the fantasy community?
I was thinking about this, and there's things that a few people in the community know. Like, I don't know if there's anything that like nobody knows. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I went on the Fantasy Face Off Network's mental health podathon, right? And I talked about some of this stuff. So if you're watching that, you know. But like, so yeah, you know, autistic, ADHD. I'm a recovering addict. You know, alcohol and hard drugs for the most part. But, you know, I've also gotten in trouble when I got sober from those. You know, I was also have gotten in trouble with things like food, gambling, sex, right? Like the ADHD brain, you know, it's all about, well, really everybody's brain, but, you know, especially the ADHD brain, as far as regulation goes, dopamine. We're all chasing dopamine, right? And so I just have a brain that just, you know, constantly fucking needs dopamine, you know? and so I have trouble. I have trouble with control when it comes to things that produce, you know, that dopamine squirt, that rush. You know, there's this book I have it right over here. I barely read some of it. It's another thing I struggle with is like picking up books and then not finishing them. It's called The Molecule of More. And it's sort of this like biopsychosocial exploration of really how dopamine runs the show. You know, even when we don't think it is. Like we think of dopamine as like, you know, very micro level, like a person using drugs or like ADHD brain and something like that, right? But like, you know, when you look up at a mountain and want to climb it, you know, that's dopamine, right? Like when you know, have an achievement or win something, right? It's dopamine. Right?
I was going to use when you draft a player in a fantasy football.
Yeah.
You accept a trade, right? You see that trade in your inbox.
Right. And listen, dopamine runs the show. I mean, there's all sorts of other adrenaline, cortisol, serotonin, like they're all but like for me personally, like, the story is dopamine. So yeah, I'm a recovering addict. I've been sober from that for 21 years as of April 5th, 2023. Um, as I said on the Face Off Mental Health Padathon, um, I'm a little bit non-traditional these days in the sense that, like, I will use after 20 years without it. I'll use a little bit of cannabis products here and there. You know, uh, traditionalists will tell you that I'm no longer sober, and I will tell you that recovery is more important than sobriety, and that I define what that is for my life. And harm reduction and sobriety is a spectrum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So, but yeah, what else might they? I mean, I'm very politically oriented. I'm very politically active. I keep it out of the fantasy space as much as I can. Sometimes it's hard to do that. I'm a socialist. I mean, I'm pretty much a communist. I am very active in that regard. One of the biggest areas that I'm the most active in is solidarity with the Palestinian Liberation Movement. And so, as part of the socialist organization that I'm a part of, the biggest sort of group within that group that I dedicate my time to is works on BDS and Palestine solidarity. Um, and I'm single, but like quite intentionally so. I literally don't want anybody ever living with me again, and I don't want any children whatsoever. I got a vasectomy in my 30s. One of the first questions they asked me was like, how many kids do you have? And I was like, 0. I'm trying to keep it that way. And sort of like the mild pushback and sort of eyebrow raising I would get, which is nothing compared to what women get when they want to like have their tubes tied or something, like that. And like are just convinced like, no, I just don't want to have kids. And like, they get a lot of pushback in the medical industry about all these things about like trying to keep them from doing that. I just interviewed a friend for the podcast, the Brian Talks to Humans podcast, and she got cancer. And like early on in the process, she's like, take it out, take the whole uterus out, hysterectomy, right? And like the doctors were trying to do things short of that to try to like preserve her ability to have kids in case she wanted to. And she was like telling doctors, like, I don't want to have kids. Could you please just, and
What good that's gonna do if it kills me?
Right. And it wound up getting worse, and they had to do it anyway. And like she could have died, but
yeah, which is so strange because there's so many orphan teams in fantasy football. But there's how many children exist in this world that actually need parents. So giving birth isn't the only way to acquire offspring or acquire children. If you so choose to later on, that friend of yours, she could choose to adopt, and same with you if you ever change your minds.
And speaking of adoption, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know this about me in the community, but I have 2 dogs, 2 adopted dogs, and I'm a huge dog lover. I see a dog, I turn into a 5-year-old. Like if I go to a party, I'm either talking to the oldest people in the room and or whatever that I found. Like if there's like, forget it. I'm just gonna sit in the corner and play with the dog, talk to the dog. Like
the dog's way more interesting than any of you humans.
Oh, I'd be in my glory, So yeah, I make sure that that I have dogs in my life. I had two guys. One passed away December 2020, and the other July 2021. And then like a few weeks after the second one passed, I got these guys. They came as a bonded pair. They were in Louisiana, and they were living with a family. And like the little girl they were living with got bitten by an outside dog, somebody else's dog. But but became terrified of all dogs, including them. And so they
I
had
remember
to
when
be
I got
like,
bit by a dog when I was like 5. That kind of happened to me too. Yeah.
and they had to like coop them up and like crate them a lot. And so they made the choice to say it's better for these dogs if they go live with somebody else. And so, I knew I was kind of probably going to end up with 2 again anyway. And I was able to keep these guys from getting split up. So yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't
Almost
know.
a bit of like the circle of life, full circle for you there.
Yeah, I don't know if there's other things that people, don't know about me. Nothing juicy,
Well, I mean, you've already plugged the mental health podathon on the FF
Yeah.
Face Off Network. Apparently, Jamie's saying he seems like, and I knowing Jamie, I don't doubt this at all. That he watched all 24 hours of the podathon and he's saying yours was the best segment. So,
Well, because
go check it out, people.
Unsurprisingly, I made it political, right? Like, don't get me wrong. Like, when people talk about mental health awareness and and destigmatizing, especially for men and all that stuff, I love it, right? But we don't go far enough. Like, it's great to talk about mental health, but if you're not going to create the material conditions for folks to have access to care and medication, then what are we doing, right? Like, and I mean that as a society, not as the people promoting the awareness, right?
No, for sure.
And like Scott Fishbowl, right? Like, I don't get me wrong, I am not insulting it and critiquing it in any way, but it's great that we raise all that money for Toys for Tots or whatever. I just wish he and others would add to the message. What about a world in which the Scott Fishbowl doesn't exist anymore because we don't need it? Because systemically, we haven't created a world where kids are poor and 1 in 5 kids goes to bed hungry. Like, it's great to buy them toys at Christmas, but what are we doing about systemic poverty? Right? Like my teachers, my local teachers union, we do this thing called wrap and roll, around the holidays. In each staff room in the schools, there's like 11 buildings, and we get these like, these notes that like, whatever wish list things, 14-year-old boy, coat extra large or something like that. And when you look at the list of things, right, most of these things they're asking for, they're not video games, they're not toys, right? They're not like even high-end sneakers. They're like winter coat, right? So we live in a world, right, that makes it so that those people can't afford coats and have to rely on the generosity of others for it. And that generosity deserves to be celebrated. What about the world creating the poverty, right? Like, if half the people who bought the coats or whatever, or who played in Scott Fishbowl, right, then took it a step further and got politically active to eliminate the root cause of the problem, we'd be in a lot better shape. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, right? But we'd be a couple steps further down the road.
We're still human after all. It's tough to improve on that. No, yeah, that does make good points. Is that there's always more we can always do. Each of us. I'm sure even you, Brian. You probably think, you probably, as much as you do, you probably still struggle. There's
Sure.
more I could.
And in fact, oftentimes the people, and I'm not patting myself in the back, but the people who are as active as I am are often the ones most guilty that they're not doing more.
Even though they're doing them, but it's the idea of
because we care enough.
Yeah, the more you find out, the more you realize you don't know. It's almost like that. The more you do, the more you realize how much there is left to do.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go a little lighthearted here, because Jamie agrees with you on the not wanting to live with anyone evermore, because it's better have the option to send them home. So you'll apparently never live with them.
That implies, well, forget it.
He'll bring it up in a comment anyway later, so we'll let him bring it up. Probably, I know what you're thinking. But yes, I guess. Okay. Really lighten the mood up. We can again talk like fantasy football and the focus on fantasy football.
I mean,
honestly,
you know what you're getting when you have me on a show that doesn't talk about football.
What I wanted. I want genuine, and if that's what you want to express, perfect.
Yeah.
I think it's great so far. This I mean, it's already been an hour. It hasn't felt like an hour. This has flown by. A lot of important messages that maybe a lot of people need to hear. So really happy to have you on, Brian. But yes, what do you love? We'll talk. And then you get to talk about the things you actually really love. What's your preferred league format in fantasy?
Yeah, so I'm pretty vanilla. Just give me a basic dynasty, 12 team PPR superflex, some form of tight end premium, and let's roll with it. Like I'm in some other spicy leagues, but yeah, I mean that's my go-to. Let's fire it up. Yeah.
If you're gonna have so many leagues, you'd like at least some of them to be somewhat similar, trade values across them, and
Yeah, for sure, absolutely right. Because I mean, it also is sort of a basis for language and valuation and things like that. Like when we hop on a show and we talk about things, like we're generally talking about 12 team superflex PPR tight end premium, right? Like it's kind of
will this
understood.
player finishes a wide receiver 1 means top 12, and we just know that.
Yeah, it's kind of understood that way, in most dynasty, spaces. Now I'm in some leagues like I have one where it's like 7 flex and 3 super flex, right? I'm in one league on MFL that Matt Hicks runs. That's it's an arcade theme. Like every team is a video game, and there's multiple copies of players. But it's like once they hit their 3rd year, you have to shit or get off the pot. You can only have 2 third-year players on your team. Right? And then once they're waived, they're gone. They don't exist anymore, right? So it's a very rookie-centric, so like I'm in some spicy things like that, but
Hicks.
Debbie and C2C, I dabble in that too, but like, just give me my it's like your favorite pair of jeans,
Classic. So what is one rule that you feel like you have to have in every league?
I'm gonna cheat. There's 2. Max
You're the guest. Guest gets their way. Whatever you want.
Max points for non-playoff team draft picks, and no trade deadline. Right. I'm open to some nuance on those. Right. So, for example, I'm in a league where it's like no trading, and then like the 2 teams in the finals. Once they're in the finals, they can't trade. Yeah, I mean it's like no trade deadline, and then the 2 teams in the finals can't trade with anybody while they're in the final, right? Or things like that. If there's a compelling reason to join a league, like there's people I really know well and love, and they have like a week 14 trade deadline. Okay, if you catch me in a good mood, I'll join that day. Right.
Make it like at least the last week of the regular season.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. I've seen different people go. The player is eligible to be traded until they've played their first week 15 game. So if that player is playing Monday night, week 15, you can still trade them up to that kickoff on Monday night.
Yeah, and I've seen some leagues too that have done like with the max points for. It's like I think sometimes it's like for the top 3 or 4 picks, and then like the other 2 are based on standings or like. I've been in a couple that are lottery. I don't like lottery, right? I like the max points for. No system is perfect, but I think that's the best anti-tanking mechanism. And by tanking, I mean bad tanking, not like I'm going to eat a year and be bad and lose and like
I'm going to sell off my players, so there is no talent on my team. It's
right.
Like, you're talking about
bad. I'm talking about like sitting Stephon Diggs and starting Russell Gage. That kind of shit.
Especially this year, you're not going to get any points from Russell Gage.
Well, yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah. No, there's ways to go about it, right? Put the effort into trade away Stephon Diggs, and then it won't be considered bad tanking. Yeah. And you get a pick out of it. All right, so we talk about great players now. Who are your all-time favorite fantasy QB1, RB1, wide receiver 1, and tight end 1?
I have a terrible memory for stuff like this. I'll be in the middle of a podcast, like I do the other podcast, Dynasty Fever, in the middle of the week with Jesse, and we'll be talking, and he'll bring out some player, and it's only like 6-7 years ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, they existed, So it's hard for me to I just, for whatever reason, it doesn't like click like that. But I do remember Michael Vick was a was a monster in fantasy, right? You know, he was Konami before we even had the word for it. And there was that one week, I forget what it was, but it was like, I don't know, whatever. He had like 67 points. I think it might have been against Washington, I think. And I got Vicked that week. I was on the losing end of that one spectacular game. And so yeah, he stands out. You know, before there was Kelsey, Tony Gonzalez and Antonio Gates, you know, were like those like next level tight ends, you know, the king of the hill, right?
I'm pretty sure Gonzalez has the most catches ever for a tight end in
Yeah.
history, and I think Gates has the most touchdowns ever for a tight end. So,
I mean, as far as a running back goes, you know, Marshall Faulk and LaDainian Tomlinson, you know, as you know, guys who had a very complete game, you know, of rushing and receiving. Wide receivers, it's tough, you know. I mean, Randy Moss was a beast. Yeah. There's been so many. Like Julio Jones was a beast for a few years. You know, T.O. had his day. I mean, Roddy White. I mean, he was fun. You know what I mean? Like,
True,
you know,
yeah.
but he was kind of like, you know, Julio's mentor. And like before Julio was Julio, you know, there was Roddy White.
He was
Yeah.
Julio's Julio before Julio was Julio Ridley's Julio. Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
You understood. Good. I
Yeah.
hope the listeners
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, but like, I mean, those are some names that come on. You know, a name that I remember that isn't like the RB1 of all time, but guys who just kind of like you look back and you're like, oh, those are some solid seasons. Like Ricky Waters, Steven Jackson. You know, as far as running backs go, I remember catching a couple really good seasons in half PPR of Matt Forte when he caught a lot of passes. You know.
He had the record before McCaffrey for catches in a season for running back.
So yeah, you know, so those are some of the names that kind of I remember over the years. Yeah.
All right. So we'll get to the final section of this episode and the season, I suppose. High five. So Brian, what are your five? Yeah, top five plus of five different categories. So at least
Yeah,
five categories.
you can't ask me, someone, especially. I think this is partly due to being autistic, and one of the ways that being autistic shows up for me. You can't ask me for a list of five and expect to not get like 7 or 8. So, you know, but
The way I see it, like usually shows season finales or like double episodes or extended. So that's what we're doing here.
So for artists and bands, I mean, Fish, right? I've seen them over 200 times. They're such a huge part of my life. You know, I've been seeing them since 1995. They've been doing it since '83. I started in 1995 when I was 17. I mean, some of my most memorable moments of my life, my best memories of my life are Fish memories. When I was 19 in 1997, me and a friend did like probably a little more than half of the summer tour. Started in Virginia Beach. We went down through like North Carolina and Georgia. Hurricane in Raleigh, the remnants of a hurricane in Raleigh, and the amphitheater was muddy and people were sliding down. Right, and then it went out west, and we let it go out west to Texas and California, and then we hooked back up with it. Alpine Valley, Wisconsin, and then Deer Creek in Indiana, and then up through Pennsylvania, New York, and to the big festival, Vermont that year. You know, so I mean, they're just, you know, and Grateful Dead as well. I only saw the Grateful Dead with Jerry alive twice. He died when I was 17, but they had a really huge impact on me, and I just absolutely love the Grateful Dead. A very different vibe, The Clash. I effing love The Clash. I mean,
Very political band.
part of that is their politics, right? They're really forward with that. Spotify did this podcast series called Stay Free, and it was like the story of the Clash, the history of the Clash. And Chuck D from Public Enemy was like the host, the narrator of it. It's no longer available. Like Spotify pulled it. Like you can't really find it anywhere. But it was such a great, interesting story. So yeah, I love the Clash. John Coltrane. I just fucking love John Coltrane. You know, like for those who don't know, jazz tenor sax for the most part. Kicked heroin, cold turkey. You know, and some people say that his music got worse after he kicked the heroin, but you know,
that's when he got really experimental.
Yeah,
Bordering on atonal jazz.
Yeah, it's spiritual plane, transcending things, and that sort of thing. But
I did love the A Love Supreme album. I did.
Yeah, for sure.
Pretty good.
So there was. Do you remember record stores when you would walk in and like buy actual, right? So I was in a record store in Westfield, New Jersey, a place called the Music Staff. It was great. It was a couple old hippies, and that's where people would go for concert tickets when you used to like wait in line for concert tickets and get a wristband and shit. You know, these kids these days. So I went in there, and that day I bought a CD. I bought a Bob Dylan CD. What is it? The one with One More Cup of Coffee and Mozambique, and anyway, and I bought A Love Supreme. Right. And I remember going to the register and the guy being like, wow, Dylan and Coltrane, that's an interesting combination. I'm like, oh, yeah. But yeah, the Coltrane for me, like, I don't know, it just takes me places. And it's one of those things where like I can like turn it on and just never have to like skip anything or, fast forward, like, what's super interesting to me, at least about the Coltrane part, is my favorite song of his is very atypical, right? It's my favorite things. So it's atypical for a few reasons. I hate the original version. Like, whatever, Julie Andrews, Sound of Music, singing my favorite things. Like I don't, right. And it's a cover to begin with, right? So that makes it atypical. And he's playing soprano sax on it, which is atypical for him. And I think the best part of it is McCoy Tyner's piano, right? So, but if you listen to Coltrane's version of my favorite things and that soprano sax, it's just like this hypnotic, whirling dervish. Like you almost feel like, yeah, it's just, oh man, it's like he's a snake charmer and like you're the snake and you're just like rolling with it. And then you get in that part in the middle, and it's quiet, and then McCoy Tyner starts, and it's just like, whoa, Dylan, of course, is up there as well. Dylan and Woody Guthrie. I love like the old Union songs and the old political folk songs and that sort of thing. Dylan, I love. People critique Dylan as like a middle class, folk singer, and they're right. I mean, you listen to the lyrics of like Blowing in the Wind, right? It's very different from the lyrics of like, some of these 1910s, Union songs like Preacher and the Slave, but he's just got such a way with words. So there's this one documentary on Dylan, the Scorsese one. What was it called? I'm drawing a blank.
Oh, is that the one with all the different actors playing different?
No, that's I'm Not Here. This was a documentary, right? So anyway,
okay.
There's this clip in the documentary, and there's this sign on a store or like something like that with like a couple sentences, and he's rearranging the words in the sentences so that you say the sentence a million different ways and it doesn't make sense. And it's like, that's kind of what he did with some of his songs. Like if you listen to some of his songs, they're just like these stringed together of like word salad vignette little images, like a captain on a ship, and then the next phrase is the blonde woman, blah 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 blah, and it's just this pastiche of images, So I definitely like political Dylan more than esoteric Dylan, but so Dylan's up there as well. Public Enemy, I think, was very seminal for me as far as hip hop goes. I don't pretend to be as big a hip hop head as some other people are. I think the '90s was the golden age, and I enjoyed, Wu-Tang Clan and Redman's from Jersey, and things like that. Lauryn Hill, right? Also from Jersey. But Public Enemy was political, you know, and was telling a story that like 13, 14-year-old suburban white boy Brian didn't know. Right? Like the song 911's a joke. Right? That's how I learned. Right? About how shitty 911 is in some places and how you're better off not calling it. Right? That's how I learned. Right? So Public Enemy was very seminal in that regard. And I guess the last one I have on this list here is kind of the one that might surprise people, Frank Sinatra. I'm a huge Frank Sinatra fan. My mother, she's Italian, she's from the Bronx. I grew up, for some reason, she was fascinated with country music. So I grew up with like country music and then like lots of Frank Sinatra. I have a lot of songs that Sinatra sings like memorized, like committed to memory. Like it comes on my iPod Classic, 17,000 songs. You can take it from my cold dead hands. Comes on my iPod Classic in the car, and like boom, I just know the lyrics. And I hadn't heard the song in like whatever a couple years. So yeah, those are kind of all over the place, I guess.
Memorable melodies set to words allow you to memorize those words more easily.
Yeah. Steve Earle too. I love Steve Earle. People might remember him as the old junkie in The Wire, the white dude with yeah,
I didn't know that at all, to be honest. Wow, I'm gonna have to go back and look that up.
He's really good. He kind of combines like folk and politics and rock and like outlaw country, and I got a lot of Steve Earle songs in my iPod Classic. Yeah.
So Jamie doesn't know the difference between early Coltrane and his later work.
Okay, well, I mean, so what like after maybe 60, 61, right? It starts to get sort of like you said, like
it's
atonal.
After he takes his giant steps, right?
It's like deconstructed, like atonal. It was called free jazz at the time, or acid jazz by some people later on. Like Ornette Coleman is another example of that was going on at the time. It's the type of jazz that people who don't like jazz listen to, and they're like, "This sounds like a 5-year-old just picked up the instrument and started messing with it," but like it tickles my brain so well. Yeah.
Such interesting rhythms in there, right? Because it's so atonal, it's making you focus on the rhythmic aspect of it.
So good. Like 61, the Live at the Village Vanguard box set, like Eric Dolphy sits in a lot on that. Oh, it's so good.
And you mentioned a couple songs by Dylan. You could remember the album name. What were some of those songs again?
So songs like Ballad of a Thin Man or Takes a Laugh, was it a Train to Laugh and Something to Cry, just like Tom Thumb's Blues, Gates of Eden, like there's just these like string of images, when you're lost in the rain in Juarez and it's Easter time too. Like we fooled the sergeant at arms into leaving his post. Like there's no cohesive narrative to any of it, but it's just kind of this like strung together like imagery. I don't know, for whatever reason, it tickles me the right way. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess
I have a whole other podcast episode we can do on why Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan is the most important rock and roll song in history. So
I know Rolling Stone magazine would certainly agree with that.
That's a whole other
number one
hour-long podcast we can do.
So I guess so you mentioned it was your mom that got you to just her listening to Sinatra so much made you listen to it as well. It sounds like Jamie was his great aunt who listened to it.
Yeah.
He does have a fish story. Now it's the fish jumped out of the tank when he was a kid and he found it a week later behind the dresser. I'm sure
Thanks.
Fish could make a song based on those lyrics and it would sound amazing.
Thanks for your contribution, Jamie. Really appreciate it.
Fish is also spelled differently when it comes to the band.
It's
Oh yeah, this is and the quintessential Jamie comment. 20 years from now, we're going to be talking about who's your RB1 ever, and it's Roshan Johnson, clearly, right? Okay, we'll move on to Brian's list. So read up on the top 5 books. Oh, plus, yeah.
Books? Yeah, so I have read very little fiction. Apparently I've come to learn that, again, not everybody's the same, but that's a way that being autistic shows up for a good chunk of us. Is we will read a story and like characters and bullshit. It's boring. Give me stuff that really happened, things I can learn from, and that's kind of just the way my brain is. And so it's all nonfiction. So Dream Keepers was a book first written in 1994. It's by Gloria Ladson-Billings, and it introduces the idea of culturally relevant pedagogy. And it's about like, what do successful teachers who are successful in teaching African-American students, what do they do? Right. And it was a seminal work in that regard, in this idea that, we need to move on beyond like multicultural education, which is very surface, and really get at the idea of why schools weren't serving, African American. I mean, first of all, they weren't built for them since the 1800s, right? But at least the public, like the white run establishment systems, were not built for with them in mind, like so much of this country. And so that was really seminal in that regard, in sort of a turning point for me in what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be as a teacher. Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. It's a little more recent book. So Howard Zinn wrote People's History of the United States in, I think, 1980 was the first time it was published. And the title, is a People's History. It's a bottom-up history of the United States. It's a history that says the history of America is the history of the American people, not of the kings and generals and politicians and things like that. And so there's been different sort of adjacent versions of that. And one is Indigenous Peoples' History in the United States. And as much as I thought I knew Indigenous history to an extent and was teaching it well to an extent, this is whole other level kind of stuff. And one of the things that really stood out to me is how unbroken the string of ghoulishness and monstrosity has been toward Indigenous people. When you learn about it in school, you get the impression like it pops up when it's like famous and relevant, and then like you don't learn about it for a while, and then it pops up again during another chapter in history, and then it goes away. And what this book really, one of the many things this book does is show you how it's just an unbroken history of bullshit, that we've done to Indigenous people. Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator, got his poster right up there. Another seminal book in education and how education should be, where the teacher is not like the sage on the stage, they're the guide on the side, right? And they're facilitating a conversation on how to read the world, not just read words, and like, how do we change this world, and it comes from his work with teaching literacy to adults in Brazil, and then sort of has been expounded upon everywhere in many places. It's deeply political. It embraces the idea that to be neutral is to be on the side of the oppressor. And a lot of well-meaning people who would consider themselves progressive would not like my classroom. My classroom is not neutral. My classroom starts with the assumption, right, that our society is built on cis heteropatriarchy, racism, capitalism, which which is not just a thing, it is an ism that is a system of oppression, like racism, sexism, misogyny, right? Ableism, xenophobe, right? All those things. It's built on that, right? And part of our job living here is to address that, right? You know, and so, you know, that book was very influential for me as a teacher. Another book called Blues People. You may have heard of the author Amiri Baraka. He's a poet. I mean, he wrote a lot of things, but very famous for his poetry in the 60s and what was called the Black Arts Movement. It was kind of like a cultural artistic wing of the Black Power movement, if you will. And a lot of it was, he was from Jersey, so a lot of it was, you know, centered here and him and his folks. But before he was Amiri Baraka, his former name was Leroy Jones. And so this is a book that he wrote when his name was Leroy Jones. And it's Blues People. And it's kind of like a history of African Americans in America, but really through the lens of culture and music. I just remember just loving that book and soaking it up. And you know, a couple more. Black Against Empire. It's a really thick book. It's a exhaustive history of the Black Panthers. And sort of how they're situated in history, particularly the history of the U.S. left. Another book, recent book along those lines is From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation. So like taking this Black Lives Matter, you know, movement and saying, what does it mean then to like have true, you know, Black liberation in the 21st century? The Meaning of Marxism is a book that kind of takes Marxism and tries to, you know, break it down in digest. Like it's not watered down and or anything like that. It's kind of dense sometimes in academic, but it takes like these components of this thing that seems hard to learn and sort of, you know, breaks it down, explains it, talks about it in practical terms, what it looks like in the 21st century, things like that.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking because like, Marx wrote that the late 1800s. So
yeah, 1848 was the Communist Manifesto. Capital, Das Kapital, was the 1860s. So yeah,
we're talking about like 180 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So how much has changed since then? Context and
right.
What could we do to bring those ideas into our world?
And the last book is the one that I'm just about finished with. It's the first book that I've been able to read that much of and been sad about it ending in a really long time. It's called Unmasking Autism, you know, and it's about this. It's about a lot of things, but in many ways, this moment of high masking autistic folks like myself who slip through the cracks, and sort of what all that means, you know, and what unmasking ourselves means, and what building a world that is made for all types of brains means, you know, and so I've thoroughly enjoyed that. Yeah.
Actually, that led me to something I was going to talk about earlier. Just I think you referenced it, like how people are getting diagnosed now. I know Victoria, my wife, she's a therapist, and she talks about some of her clients. What's happened is their children have gone in and gotten either diagnosed with ADHD or autism, and then they try like trace it back, and then suddenly, you know, I think it seemed like the focus in the 90s was the boys, the hyperactive form of ADHD, and that was the one that caused a problem. So the quieter forms of ADHD, the lack of attention and retention, which seems to be more prevalent for females, that went so undiagnosed. So especially women now are being more diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah, it must be said that a white cis hetero dude like me, the criteria and the ideas of what autism and ADHD were built around people like me, and B, getting people to believe you, getting a diagnosis, things like that for people who aren't in those categories, been really tough. In fact, there's a phrase that was used for a while called female autism that was applied to people who weren't even female identified as like the quieter, higher massed, more well behaved, not the typical version of, like a socially awkward tech bro, like, and so, it's interesting, right? And you'll hear people say everybody's autistic now. It's like, well, I mean, we have better information and things like that. And your grandfather, who could talk about 5 hours about stamps, and who ate a grilled cheese and tomato juice or tomato soup every single day for lunch. Maybe he was too.
Let's
Right?
use some critical thinking.
Yeah.
Discover some things.
Maybe he was too. Yeah.
All right. So why don't you show us, I guess you'll have to tell us, your top 5 plus favorite movies.
Movies are tough for me because like people will quote movie lines and shit like that. And like, I barely remember things sometimes. And honestly, between all the time I spent in fantasy football trying to manage my 50 leagues, doing content for fantasy football, then doing the political work and all that, like, I can't remember the last time I sat down and watched like a movie or a show or something like that, for like enjoyment, The Big Lebowski might be my favorite movie of all time. I love The Big Lebowski. Like that movie is so good. It's a smart, funny movie. It's not just some jerky, funny movie like Old School. And then there's just like a bunch that are just kind of like there. Like Do the Right Thing was seminal, in my understanding of what was going on. Like when you talk about like the 80s in Brooklyn and the race relations that were going on at the time. And Sorry to Bother You, more contemporary movie. Boots Riley, the frontman of The Coup. It's a communist. It's a rap group. It's called The Coup. He did a really good movie called Sorry to Bother You. It's sort of a political commentary. Another Oakland sort of centric movie is a movie called Blind Spotting. Daveed Diggs plays a guy who's getting out of like jail and probation, and he witnesses a cop murder somebody, like while he's working. When he gets out, it's a really good movie. Little Miss Sunshine was smart and funny. Farha is a dramatization of one girl's experience during Al Nakba, which is Arabic for the catastrophe, which is the word we use for the founding of Israel and the dispossession of land from Palestinians. And Y Tu Mama Tambien was really good. If the guy from Motorcycle Diaries, when he was a little younger, was in this movie. The movie called The Sea Inside, right? So the dude from what's that movie? He's got the air gun that he kills people with.
No Country for Old Men.
Okay, that guy plays it's a dramatization of a real life story of a guy in Spain who fought for euthanasia to be legal. That's a really great movie. Moonlight 2016 was a great movie. Inside Llewyn Davis was a great movie. That's the kind of what I came up with. Like if I had to pick 5 of those, it'd be tough, but like definitely Big Lebowski would be number 1. Yeah.
Well, that's the only one Jamie mentioned as well in the comments. I think
I didn't even realize it was old enough to have been on VHS. Yeah.
Yeah, 90s movie.
Is it really? Wow, I'm old. But wait, the 90s was 10 years ago, right? Like that's how it works, right?
Yeah. So top 5. Oh, is it 5? Oh no, it's actually 6. Top 6 TV shows. This was close to the 5.
Yeah. Well, I helped you out on Game Day Foods. Game of Thrones, The Wire, Sopranos, just really great, like golden age of television, Renaissance TV, HBO shows. Orange is the New Black. Like there's valid critiques of Orange is the New Black from a political perspective, of trauma porn and, some other things that it doesn't like get right, But at the same time, I think it did go a long way to put out some topics, about women and about women and the criminal injustice system. And so I think that was and it did it in a way that was, entertaining at times too. The Simpsons, like, it's been around since like for like 30 something years. Like it's so smart and like keeps up with the times. And it's real Simpsons aficionados would say, oh well, after season 7 or 8 or something, I don't care, it's the Simpsons,
when
right?
the original writers left, right? Like
I turn on FXX, I watch the marathon on the weekend, and like I don't have to change the channel, right, at all, right? Like it just and what's interesting too is like so it came out, like it was on the Tracy Ullman show as like shorts. And then it came out and like on its own as like, I think 1991, it came out as a show. And that's right in the middle of the first Iraq War. And I'm like 13 years old, right? And so I'm on like the boardwalk in Seaside Heights. And like they're selling these like bootleg Simpsons t-shirts of like Bart Simpson like attacking Saddam Hussein. Like the cultural, like
with his skateboard, right? With him.
Yeah, the cultural sort of like, blend of like
America's two obsessions in the early 90s, Simpsons,
right,
Iraq.
the very new cultural icon that people were hooking into with like the contemporary, like we have to hate this guy bullshit, right? And it was just, so the Simpsons, yeah, it was really, really good. And I want to give a shout out to and what's also interesting about the Simpsons is the evolution of like when it first started, Bart was the main character, and he was like cheeky cowabunga, eat my shorts and all that. And then it kind of evolved and Homer is the focus. He's the sort of main character, if you will, and the sort of funny buffoonery that comes there. And there's sort of a slight parallel of that in South Park with how Randy Marsh has, sort of become a much bigger focus than he was before. And I want to shout out Pee-wee's Playhouse. A lot of people don't realize that Pee-wee, before the Playhouse was like a TV show, did some stage stuff that was a little more spicy. He toned it down for the TV show, even though there was some smart things on that TV show. There are some other things that, we look back on now and we probably would say that what was this? The guy with the turban who went mecca lecca hi ho. That like that's maybe a little culturally inappropriate. It wouldn't fly in 2023. But Pee-wee's Playhouse was so creative and imaginative and like weird is cool, and it's cool to be weird, right?
Yeah.
And that was, and I wanted to shout that out because Paul Rubens just passed away a little while ago, and I think that's like because it's so old and was fairly short-lived, compared to a lot of other classic TV shows like All in the Family or something like that, right? Like it had its time and it was very influential, and obviously the movie was too, and yeah, so shout out Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Apparently, so I don't know if it's just okay. So it's a show called 11/12/63. James Franco goes back in time to try and stop the killing of Kennedy.
No, I've never seen that.
Yeah. Oh boy. Wonder what James Franco was doing before he decided to write that idea. Maybe he was method acting for Pineapple Express. Did you mention Game of Thrones?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. I guess I tried to erase Game of Thrones from my mind, so naturally I would do that.
People want to shit on the last season, and like I get it, right? Like, but you have to remember that like George R.R. Martin, like they ran out of source material. Like when they started that thing, they thought that George R.R. Martin would have things pretty much wrapped up, by then, and he did.
Still waiting for that 6th book,
right? So yeah, so they did have to kind of like, all right, accelerate things and Hollywood it up sometimes with some leaps, just tie up the story. I get that, right? But like, you can't take like whatever that is, that 8th season that you have whatever opinion of it. Which, by the way, I still thought it was an entertaining season, and then erase the like 7 glorious seasons of wonderful TV that we got, like you can't let it do that. You know, like the way that some people want to focus on the ending of The Sopranos when it cuts off like mid sentence or whatever. Like, really, that's what you want to focus on? Not the fact that it like put TV like kind of back on the map, if you will. You know, like real substantive TV, and you know,
The idea of the appointment viewing, right? Waiting for it every week, and
yeah.
oh no, but the in between seasons in the summers, oh no, come back show, no, for sure. But yeah, we always end at the end with top 5 game day foods. We get back to sports after all.
Yeah, well, you've seen me tonight, as with every other night that I'm on a show, drinking coffee and seltzer, and that's my game day food.
All right,
Uh,
those two. Well, we
yeah,
you banked
yeah.
up banked up too much on the earlier things. You're only allowed 2 on this
Like
list.
like if I happen to be hungry while Red Zone is on, whatever, I'll eat something. But there's no like ritualistic, like I'm gonna sit in front of TV with my buffalo wings and my football jersey. It's just not me, man. It just it's just not what I do. But when I was younger, in my younger days before I was vegan, I made really killer nachos, like that had like the works, like kitchen sink nachos. They were really, really good, and I would bring those out sometimes for like Sunday games, because I would go watch like the Jets game with my friend Todd. You know, I would wear my Wing Corbett jersey. So we'd do that, or like for Super Bowl, I would make them if there was a Super Bowl party or something like that. But yeah, nowadays, man, like honestly, when Red Zone's on, 60% of the time Red Zone's on, I'm either here at my laptop where I can only hear it, or I'm taking a nap.
That's
Like,
the fantasy lineups are set. There's nothing you can
like
do.
yeah, like I'm completely divorced from the result at that point. Like I did what I could, I'll figure it out later.
All right. Well, no later on this season 3 of press coverage. This is at the end here. So
I sorry I dragged you here for an hour and 45 minutes, but
honestly, this was incredible, Brian. It was honestly exactly what I was thinking it would be and hoping it would be. True, genuine, authentic you, and that's really all we can ask. And I just want to thank, really, not even just this season, but this is episode 40 of press coverage. All 40 guests I've had on have all delivered something unique and special, truly uniquely them. And I think that's just
it's
the
a
best part
really
of it.
cool concept that you have going, and you've had some really, really, really good guests. I mean, it's easy, to just know, say Kevin Coleman, for example, right? Like, just he was on recently and I know him, right? It's really easy to just whatever consume the Football Guys Dynasty podcast and the Debbie Royale content and the college football stuff, and not, and not know him with depth as a human being who is, a teacher, a father, and in his case is religious, like, and I think when we humanize people, it won't always will. It can make it harder to be a dick to them. Like I live here in this condo building. There's like 48 units, right? And the more I talk to people and learn about them and go to the HOA meeting or whatever, the more they are a neighbor, a person, right? So that when I'm going to the trash bin, right, the trash area, right, and I can put the garbage bag on top of the already full garbage can and say, fuck it, I don't care. Raccoons and flies, right? Or I can take 3 more steps in and put it in the emptier can on the left. And when I know that we're all in this together, right, and those human beings are real, right, it makes it harder to be a dick, right? Like I don't have any children on my floor, right? But there's a lot of kids here, right? And like I've met some of the kids, and like I don't really like kids that are younger than 15. I don't really know how to have a conversation with them, but like I wouldn't be loud at night, because that kid is next door, right?
You're being
They're a
considerate.
real person, they're a real human being, right? The old couple that lives here, where the husband has to really holds his wife by her arm like every step of the way and walk really slow. Like if I if I hold the elevator door open too long and break the elevator, I'm making them go down the stairs. So like I guess what I'm saying is when you humanize people and know them more and in their depth as, real humans and not some, Twitter avatar whose fantasy take you want to shit on because you're feeling snarky that day, right? I think it makes it harder to be a dick.
Maybe I have to remember to be less snarky as well. That's a good lesson for all of us. Jamie said he could be listening to any fantasy football shows, and actually anyone who's listening to this could as well. But yeah, he said he'd rather learn more about Brian, and I'm glad who's still listening to this point has made it through an hour and 50 minutes. And is still enjoying it, is still entertained and enjoyed. So thanks. Jamie's been here the whole time. He may as well have just been on the show too. He's been in all the work, so appreciate that, Jamie.
Well, he kicked all the women out of his bed, so
true. I guess he's got more time for fantasy football, more time for Brian. But I truly appreciate you coming on. This was fantastic, Brian.
No, man, thanks so much for having me on. It was great. Really loved it. Yeah.
So Jamie's neighbor blasts the radio when his kids are here and he won't stop. So I blast mine in the middle of the night when he has to wake up early. I was going to say, maybe Jamie's neighbor needs to listen to this episode. Or some of Jamie's fantasy content. Then you can humanize Jamie. Not just this like super cool Cleveland connoisseur doctor dude. But Jamie Pirog. Just a decent guy with a family and kids. But yes. So I guess the one thing I want to say is, I'll plug for you, Brian, but you're on the Dynasty Saturday Night 5. You'll be on Saturday night. Imagine that. Not at 5 o'clock, though. It's the list of 5. That's the 5's for. But yeah, there's tons of great content on the Going for Two Live network. And I'll steal one of your phrases here. But for every video you watch on YouTube, give the thumbs up, give the like, comment, make sure you hit the notifications. Feed the YouTube algorithm, as Brian always likes to say. That word I'm looking at, ravenous.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Algorithm.
Wait. One more thing. I'm sorry. So what I'm trying to do is I'm really good at ideas, but not at like getting things going. So I want to start a neurodiversity affirming, neurodivergent friendly, like fantasy football space. I don't know what that is, whether it's a website or a Discord or whether it's a set of leagues or something like that. But I got a name for it. It's the ND zone. Instead of like the end zone, it's the ND zone, the neurodivergent zone. Or I might come up with a fun thing for the E. So like it'll be END zone, but it'll mean something like every neurodivergent or something like that, But so if anybody out there, whether you're neurodivergent or not, and you want to like, I don't know, like talk about like how to do that, or like want to help me get it started, or have any ideas or any interest or whatever, just hit me up on the tweets. On Elon's plaything called X.
At FFJunkie_. And I'm at Senra says, again, Brian Ford, my final guest for season 3 of Press Coverage. Shout out to Jeff Lambert, just again, for setting up this whole network. Check out all the Going for Two live YouTube stuff and all the podcast episodes as well. Jeff does tons of hard work to allow us to have this platform. So super appreciative, Jeff, for giving us this and for selecting me as this host 2 years ago, whatever it was. And yeah, it's been super fun. All 40 episodes have been a blast, including this one, Brian. So thank you very much. I guess Brian, maybe it's been too long. I guess he's frozen and smitten. Oh no.
No, I thought you were about to hit end. I'm like,
no. Okay, no, that's so polite of you. That's great. No, okay. Well, I guess that is the time to end. So, again, thank you, Jamie. Thanks everyone in the chat. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
And this was another episode of Press Coverage.